Murder, She Wrote is such a fun episode of Wings. This is the 21st episode of the second season, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens. My thoughts are not too extensive, but I do have some, and mostly my thoughts are just positive. It's really enjoyable. It starts off rather entertainingly, but not in the way I thought it was going, actually. I have seen this before, I couldn't remember it very well. Helen is giving this guy coffee, and he's very aggressive, and he's demanding that she make sure it's decaf coffee, otherwise he'll be up all night, and she says, yes, it's decaf. Here's my number. If you wake up in the middle of the night because it's accidentally not decaf, you can call me. And I thought that, she was going to accidentally realise it wasn't decaf, and B, she was hitting on him with the number. Neither of those things happened. A, she reveals that she knew it wasn't decaf. When he was out of the room, she revealed that it was not decaf. And B, it was Roy's number that she gave him. So a really fun way to start things off. We then get in with the main narrative, and Joe and Brian's apartment needs to be fumigated, so Joe is, of course, staying with Helen, and Faye invites Brian to stay with her, and initially he doesn't really want to, but he realises it's probably the best option, and they are at the dinner table. Faye is making food, Brian is really enjoying the food. It's actually a really pleasant time, and Faye goes off to do something, and Brian is watching Fugitives from Justice, the TV show. And just before this, Faye had been telling him about how before she was married, she used to take in boarders, and she'd like to cook for the boarders. And it just so happens that this Fugitives from Justice episode is about a woman called Florence Chambers who used to take in boarders and murder them with food. And we see a picture of her on the screen when she was younger, and then they show what she might look like now using aging software. And then, of course, we have a picture of Faye on screen. Of course, well, I say of course, presumably it's a coincidence that they just look very similar, but Brian begins to connect the dots in the way that in his mind makes sense. And he begins to panic that she was Florence Chambers. He tells the others about this, and of course, they're saying he is speaking absolute nonsense. But then he starts to quiz Faye, and we have an interesting scene because Faye is actually sitting at Helen's counter, drinking tea or coffee, I don't know what it was. And we don't normally see Faye in the airport away from her desk, so it was quite nice. And then, of course, spending some time in Faye's home as well. We're just getting to see a little bit more of Faye, which I really like. And Brian is asking her all of these really awkward questions. Initially they're okay, and then we have a bit of a spelling bee, and then he starts to ask about her dead husbands, which obviously because Faye doesn't understand what's going on, it's a little bit creepy. And it's very funny, and I really found that to be very, very entertaining. And then Faye reveals that she's going to cook the leg of lamb for dinner. And unbeknownst to her, Brian invites Joe and Helen over for dinner as well, because strength in numbers. Faye's not bothered about this, but unfortunately, the leg of lamb didn't defrost in time, so we have a bit of chaos with switching salads, as Brian doesn't want to eat the salad that he thinks is poisoned by Faye, and we have a lot of back and forth with which one the real poison is. And then he goes into the kitchen to help Faye with something at her insistence, and we, the viewer, see that he's under the sink trying to fix the garbage disposal, and Faye gets the leg of lamb out ready to defrost it, and Brian hits his head. And Joe and Helen hear this. Joe rushes through, something happens to Joe, and then Helen comes in and screams, and it's madness, and it's delightful, and it's really good fun. And then we cut to watching on the television that actually the real Florence Chambers had finally been apprehended. And of course we learned there that Faye wasn't Florence Chambers. And I've only just realised the names both begin with F. If your name was Florence and you were going to change your name, I guess having another name beginning with F could be pretty handy. So I only just realised that, but that would have been something else that could, in Brian's mind, have further solidified his beliefs. And on the one hand, I want to say I like the fact that we had this mystery running through it where it was unclear whether or not Faye was Florence, but at the same time, I kind of feel like it was probably pretty obvious that wasn't the case. But I think this is such a fun episode. Really entertaining, really thoroughly enjoy it. A great episode to focus on Faye, and I think that the pacing was great, the progression of the narrative was great, very, very fun. Maybe one of my personal favourites. I did have a lot of fun with this one, as I've said about 20 times now. It's a brilliant episode, and one that I really thoroughly enjoyed. If you haven't seen it, definitely look out for Murder, She Roasts. It's pretty brilliant.